Emma's eyes snapped open. Darkness. She was surrounded by it, the thick, heavy air suffocating her. Panic seized her. Where was she? What had happened? The last thing she remembered was walking home from work, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the sidewalk. She tried to sit up but cried out in pain. Her wrists and ankles were bound, something rough and unforgiving digging into her skin. She struggled against the restraints, her heart pounding in her chest. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through her. She was trapped. A twig snapped nearby. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't alone. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circled her. Then a voice, deep and raspy, sliced through the darkness. "The time has come, child." Two figures, shrouded in dark robes, emerged from the trees. They moved with an unnerving grace, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Emma shrank back, her mind reeling. Who were these people? What did they want with her? The robed figures hoisted Emma to her feet, their grip like iron. She stumbled, her legs numb from fear and the cold ground she had been lying on. They dragged her through the undergrowth, her bare arms and legs getting scratched by unseen branches. Emma struggled against her captors, her fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. She had to escape. She kicked out, aiming for a shrouded leg, but her foot met only air. The figures didn't even flinch. "Let me go," Emma screamed, her voice hoarse and raw. "Please, I won't tell anyone, I swear." Her pleas were met with silence. The figures continued their relentless march through the dark woods, their grip on her unyielding. Despair threatened to consume Emma. She was trapped at the mercy of these things. But a spark of defiance still flickered within her. She wouldn't give up. She would find a way to escape. She had to. The trees began to thin, moonlight filtering through the branches above. Emma's eyes widened as she saw where they were taking her. A clearing lay ahead, bathed in eerie silver light. In the center, a stone altar stood stark and cold. And on that altar, a woman lay bound, her long dark hair cascading down her back like a silken waterfall. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the sky, her chest rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. She looked resigned, defeated. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through Emma. This was real. This was happening. The robed figures pushed her towards the clearing, their movements stiff and ritualistic. "No!" Emma cried, digging her heels into the soft earth. "Please don't do this, don't hurt me!" But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The figures continued their inexorable advance, their shadowy forms growing larger, more menacing as they approached the clearing. They reached the edge of the clearing, and Emma's heart pounded in her chest. The woman on the altar didn't move, didn't even blink. She was like a living statue, her fate sealed. And Emma knew, with chilling certainty, that she was about to share the same fate. They dragged Emma towards the altar, their movements rough and uncaring. She struggled against them, but it was no use. They were too strong. They threw her onto the cold stone next to the other woman. Emma landed with a thud, the breath knocked out of her. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air, her body throbbing with pain. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, she scrambled back, putting as much distance between herself and the other woman as possible. The woman didn't even look at her. Her eyes remained fixed on the sky, her expression vacant. Emma wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her to fight back. But something in the woman's stillness, in the utter defeat that emanated from her, told Emma it was no use. The robed figures moved closer, their forms blotting out the moonlight. Emma cowered back against the cold, unforgiving stone of the altar, her eyes darting from one hooded figure to another. They were going to do something to her. She could feel it in the air, in the way the silence seemed to crackle with anticipation. And there was nothing she could do to stop them. The robed figures formed a circle around the altar, their dark forms swaying slightly in the night breeze. A low, guttural chanting began to rise from beneath their hoods, the sound sending chills down Emma's spine. She had never heard anything like it before, something ancient and evil. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way around Emma, suffocating her. She felt a presence, dark and powerful, begin to stir in the depths of the woods. It was drawn to the chanting, to the energy that was building in the clearing. Emma closed her eyes, trying to block out the chanting, the oppressive atmosphere, the sheer terror that threatened to consume her. But there was no escape. The chanting seemed to seep into her very pores, into her blood, into her bones. She felt a hand on her arm, cold and clammy. She opened her eyes to see one of the robed figures leaning over her, its face still hidden in the shadows of its hood. "Be still, child," the figure rasped, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Your purpose will soon be revealed." The chanting reached a fever pitch, the air vibrating with power. The moonlight above the clearing seemed to dim, as if the very stars were recoiling from the ritual taking place below. Emma's breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the trees at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and skeletal, his robes a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded him. He moved with an unnerving grace, his hands clasped behind his back, his face hidden in the shadows of a hood. Power radiated from him, ancient and malevolent. The chanting ceased abruptly as the figure reached the edge of the circle. The robed figures parted slightly, bowing their heads in reverence. "Brothers and sisters," the figure said, his voice surprisingly deep and resonant, "we gather here tonight to enact an ancient ritual, a ritual that will usher in a new age of darkness." His gaze swept over the clearing, finally settling on Emma. His eyes, glowing with an eerie inner light, seemed to pierce her very soul. "The vessel is prepared," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Let the awakening commence." The robed figures surged forward, grabbing Emma's limbs, pinning her to the altar. She struggled against them, her heart pounding in her chest, but their grip was unbreakable. Terror, raw and primal, coursed through her. "No!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the clearing. "Please don't do this, I don't want to die." But her pleas were met with silence. The robed figures continued to hold her down, their movements cold and impersonal, as if she were nothing more than an object to them. The skeletal figure moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. He raised his hands, his long bony fingers spread wide. "Silence," he commanded, his voice echoing with power. The clearing fell silent. Even Emma's struggles ceased, her body going limp with a fear so profound it bordered on paralysis. She could only watch in mute horror as the skeletal figure leaned closer, his face now illuminated by the eerie inner light that emanated from him. He was a creature of darkness, she realized, something ancient and evil, and he was about to unleash that darkness upon the world. The skeletal figure began to chant in a language Emma didn't understand, the words ancient and powerful, filled with a darkness that seemed to claw at the edges of her mind. The air around them crackled with energy, the very earth beneath them seeming to tremble. Emma felt a searing pain in her head, as if someone were driving a hot poker through her skull. She screamed, the sound raw and primal, but her scream was swallowed by the darkness that was closing in around her. Above the skeletal figure, a vortex of dark energy began to form, swirling and pulsing like a living thing. It grew larger and larger, until it filled the clearing, blotting out the moon and stars, casting the clearing in an oppressive, suffocating darkness. Emma wanted to scream again, to close her eyes, to somehow escape the horror that was unfolding before her. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch in mute terror as the vortex of darkness descended upon her, engulfing her in its cold, all-consuming embrace. The pain was unbearable. It ripped through Emma, tearing at her very essence, shredding her thoughts, her memories, her very sense of self. She felt herself being pulled apart, atom by atom, her being scattered like dust on the wind. And yet, through the pain, through the terror, through the utter annihilation of her being, a spark of awareness remained, a tiny, flickering flame in the vast, cold darkness. It clung to life, refusing to be extinguished. The darkness pressed in on the flame, trying to smother it, to consume it, to make it a part of itself. But the flame resisted. It flickered and sputtered, but it refused to go out. And slowly, miraculously, it began to grow stronger. It was a faint glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming despair, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. But would it be enough? Could a single, flickering flame hold back the tide of darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path? Or would it too eventually be swallowed by the abyss? And then, as suddenly as it began, the pain stopped. The darkness receded, leaving Emma lying on the cold stone altar, gasping for breath, her body drenched in a cold sweat. She lay there for a moment, her mind blank, her senses reeling. She was alive. She was free. But as she sat up, taking in her surroundings, a chilling realization washed over her. The clearing was empty. The robed figures were gone. The skeletal figure was gone. Even the other woman was gone. She was completely alone. And yet she could feel it. A presence within her, something dark and powerful, lurking beneath the surface of her consciousness, watching her, waiting. The entity was still there. It had taken root in her soul, weaving itself into the very fabric of her being. It was a part of her now, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it would never truly leave her. She had survived the ritual, but at what cost? Emma stumbled to her feet, her legs shaking, her body still weak from the ordeal. She had no idea how long she had been gone, or where she was, or how she was going to get home. All she knew was that she had to get away from this place. As she took a step, she felt a surge of power course through her, dark and exhilarating. It was the entity, she realized, its power now flowing through her veins. It was intoxicating, addictive. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to give in to the darkness that beckoned her. She had to resist. She had to hold on to what was left of herself. But for how long? As she stumbled out of the clearing, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. But for Emma, the world seemed darker than ever. The entity was awake, and it was only a matter of time before it made its presence known to the world.